I have heard many people joke about how we need to bring back spanking and similar ideas. I wanted to know how far that sentiment extends in the general public. Story 1. I got spanked as a kid. All that did was 1. Instill fear in me that voicing myself would get me hit. 2. Permanently stop me from confiding anything in my parents. They often wonder why I am not as close to both of them as my sister is, who at most got yelled at, never spanked. Story 2. The best child discipline requires understanding what your child is doing and thinking, which they may stop sharing with you if you hit them. Story 3. I see no need for corporal punishment. I never used corporal punishment on any of my children, and they turned out great. I also did not ignore bad behavior. I see unwanted behaviors as an attempt to get something, and the child does not know how to get what they want. Hold the child accountable for harm done, and teach better behaviors. Story 4. I personally would not spank because I was raised in a house where I was never spanked. My sister and I both turned out well, and my parents were solid. Based on my experience, you can be a solid parent without spanking. Any parent I knew who spanked was never the most emotionally in control. Story 5. No. It is lazy, unnecessary, and simply bad. It has been studied, and the case is very clear. For 10 years, I have worked with children who were severely problematic. Children who regularly got into fights, had to be expelled from school, had the police pick them up from school, beat their parents, beat other children, destroyed property, you name it. I have never had to hit a child. I worked with the worst-behaved children you can imagine. I had a 6-year-old who was jealous of another child's breakfast at school. So he punched the other child, chewed up his breakfast, spat the chewed-up food into the other child's face, and then during detention urinated in the other child's backpack. That kind of behavior. 100% of the parents spanked their children. It did not help. Building a connection, setting rules and boundaries, making clear what the consequences are for breaking the rules, and giving the child tools to show different behavior if they break the rules was extremely effective on every child I have ever worked with. Story 6. Absolutely not. Would you hit your significant other as a problem solver? Last I checked, giving your partner a smack to keep them in line is not only outdated, it is called domestic violence. Furthermore, speaking as someone who was beaten as a child, let's not kid ourselves, you're talking about beating children. From as far back as I can remember until I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, which was when the solid wood cutting board my mother was using on me snapped in half while in use, I reached a point where right or wrong did not matter to me. What mattered was what kept me from getting hit again. I was completely willing, as a grade schooler, to lie, throw my best friends under the bus, teach myself how to alter grades on tests, and forge my parents' signatures on behavior reports just to keep that cutting board at bay for one more day. And before you say it, no, I was not some sort of hell-raising little demon child. Behavior reports coming home were quite rare. Low grades happened to everyone sometimes, but, again, were rare. I was just a kid. The true fault lies squarely on my parents' shoulders. My mother for taking her cutting board to me for any and all infractions, no matter how minor they would have seemed to someone with a functional logic center, and my father for just standing by and letting it happen. I can still remember the day I finally woke up and realized what she was doing was horribly wrong. I had finally had enough and tried, in tears, to go to my father for help. His response, well, she is really pissed off. Story 7, no. That just teaches children that if they misbehave, their father will hit them. I want my children to think about their actions, discuss them, and understand why their actions were wrong. Story 8. I am in favor of spanking as the last option. Sometimes children will still do bad things even if you explain why they are wrong and give them chances to stop, but they will keep doing it. A good old-fashioned spanking will set that straight and establish respect. Story 9. No, it is just lazy, passed-down parenting habits. If you cannot teach your children without using physical punishment, then maybe you should reconsider how you try to communicate. It is harder, but this is a life you are raising them to adjust to the world around them. None of that sounds easy. Story 10. You are teaching your child that it is okay to hit others when angry. That is not a lesson to pass down. What we need to bring is decent parenting. Story 11. I say no. Parents say it's discipline, but you all know inattentive, impatient people. They are on their phones until a lamp falls over, and then it's spanking time because they were not attending to their child. Story 12. No. You are telling your children that it is acceptable to hit or spank others, such as their peers. This approach also damages your children's trust in you and does not communicate punishment effectively. Instead, it instills fear or encourages violent behavior. Story 13. Never justified. It's an easy way out of actually correcting your child's behavior. Personally, nothing screams, "I am a weakling or coward," more than spanking or hitting a child. I was spanked. At 21, my dad still hits me if I am out of line. I have told him repeatedly that it does not work, but he insists just because I learned self-discipline without my parents' methods. Overall, keep your hands away from a child. Story 14. Yes, but it should not be the primary form of discipline. There will be times when reasoning, grounding, taking away devices, or other methods will not work for various reasons. It is not nearly as detrimental to a child's mental health as people seem to think these days. As long as the line between discipline and abuse is not crossed, you are fine. Story 15. You should not be hitting your children. If you have to spank your children, you are doing something wrong. You need to demand respect from them early on so they never disrespect you. When you have to spank your children, you appear weak because you have already lost the battle. If you allow your children to disrespect you, they know your discipline is ineffective. Your spankings will not have an impact, and they will continue to disrespect you until you give up completely. Your children are taking advantage of you. A stern look should be the only thing you use to discipline your children. Story 16. It is the nuclear option when all other options fail and should only be used when justified. For example, my son used to run out into the street after I took him out of his car seat. After a few verbal warnings, I escalated to spanking. The first one surprised him. The second one taught him the lesson. Those are the only 2 spankings he has ever had, and he has not run into the street since. Story 17. Desmond Norris in The Naked Ape says it is a sexual activity for the spanker, especially when buttocks are exposed. I do not understand why it is acceptable to do it to boys. Imagine a male parent pulling down his girl child's pants and spanking her. Why is that somehow less objectionable if it happens to boys? My father did it. He was a pedophile and rapist. Many in my family who were not pedophiles or rapists were molested or raped. It damages a person. Stop the harm. Story 18. I got spanked only once or twice that I can remember for doing something both dangerous and something I knew I should not do. In one case, I took my seatbelt off while my mother was driving. This was back in the 1980s when infant car seats existed, booster seats did not, and cars mostly had lap belts only in the back seat. I think that while it is very easy to use spanking or other corporal punishment too often, sometimes it is the best way to reinforce that a child has broken a rule that exists for their safety. My mother was very angry at me, but I never did that again. It was less the spanking than the rest of it, including making it clear that I had done something I knew better than to do. Story 19. Spanking is a gentle way to discipline if the first warnings fail to meet expectations. For example, after 1 or 2 warnings, if they still act up and raise their voice, gentle spanking may be necessary. Why? It is better to discipline them gently before a stranger does. Story 20. If boundaries are set and the consequences for breaching those boundaries are not a deterrent, the infliction of some discomfort is sometimes needed. Otherwise, an adult is raised who does not respect boundaries and eventually has a conflict with someone who will not tolerate it. The harm that can occur when one adult teaches another about boundaries that their parents failed to teach can be severe. This should always be a last resort and never done when the disciplinarian is emotional. It should come after attempts to reason with the child. After the punishment, both sides should have time to reflect, and then the parent should sit down with the child to explain why the punishment was given. The parent must allow the child to reassure their love and know that administering the punishment was uncomfortable for the parent. Some people will accuse parents of abuse, but parents need to understand what discipline is needed and why. When advocating for corporal punishment, it often leads to misrepresentation and judgment from others. Some children can be reasoned with, but children are not always reasonable. One of the best lessons a parent can teach is about consequences for bad behavior. Many parents want to be best friends with their children and neglect their parental duties. If a child can be reasoned with from a young age, that child is exceptional. Responsible parenting and discipline can be uncomfortable at times. This is why the phrase, "This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you," was once common in many households. We are seeing the consequences of not holding children accountable in real time, resulting in adults who are not held accountable until something tragic happens. Story 21. Once, I bit my mom's hand when I was about 2 or 3 years old. I think she tried to tell me not to, but I did it again. I'm not really sure of the full story, but it ended with her biting me back. In truth, she just put her teeth in contact with my skin to scare me, not to cause any harm. I believe this can be an acceptable form of physical consequence for an action, but that is the limit. Spanking is not acceptable and serves no real purpose. As you said, we need to bring back spanking is a joke. Story 22. I never spanked my children while angry. I had my children explain their behavior or actions. I explained the consequences of both good and bad actions. Story 23. I do not have a problem with parents disciplining their children. I do not spank for mistakes. I spank for purposeful disobedience after other non-physical punishments have already been applied. So far, I have never had to spank any of my 6 children, 3 of whom are now grown. Story 24. Spanking is appropriate in the right situation. Many people who do not understand say it only teaches violence. That may be true when there is no love or respect in the home. However, when a child knows their parents love them and also knows that when the spanking occurs, it means the child has gone too far. Some children do not learn from timeouts, lectures, or being grounded. These children need limits, and if all other methods fail, a spanking usually works. A good parent knows when it is appropriate. A bad parent uses it first. Story 25. I will be spanking my children in the future and believe it is an effective form of discipline. They should understand that their actions have consequences. Of course, we will also discuss it. There is a time and place for everything. Story 26. I got spanked with the old wooden spoon when I was misbehaving. Like many others, I now enjoy getting spanked in the bedroom, so it did not have any negative effects. I remember the spoon because my mom carried one in her purse, but I do not have any negative feelings toward my mom because of it. Many children were spanked or had soap put in their mouths, including all my cousins. Nobody I know hates their parents, and we all grew up to be mature, responsible, and contributing adults. If a child needs a spanking to correct behavior in the moment, it is a temporary measure. I would not use a spoon, just open-hand spanks, but it can be an effective way to correct behavior. Story 27. Personally, I find it depends on the situation. As far as other people doing it, the way I see it, not your child, not your problem. You raise your kids your way, they will raise their kids their way. I personally do not see spanking as abuse. It can definitely become abuse if taken too far, and some people with issues may take it too far. However, in itself, spanking is just a form of punishment. It is far kinder to spank the child than to let the government deal with them later. Story 28. I am in favor of corporal punishment. To me, the line is between causing pain and causing injury. Physical pain that recedes in minutes is effective discipline. Physical damage to the body that takes days to heal is abuse. I know not everyone agrees. Story 29. I received corporal punishment multiple times. Looking back, I did things that deserved consequences. I believe discipline is acceptable and could solve many of the world's problems today. Story 30. It would be acceptable for her to understand that what she did was dangerous and not to do it again, or else she will face the punishment of a hard spanking. I would rather have my children afraid of a spanking than have them put themselves in harm's way because of poor choices. In my culture, spankings are normal in almost every household. I also grew up rough with many male cousins who were like brothers, and we would wrestle and play fight all the time. So when I did get spankings, I would laugh it off because having one of my cousins body slam me on a table was much worse than a spank. I am 30 now and really do not recall most of the times I was spanked. I only remember the times my dad had me put my hand out and clap it as if he was giving me a really hard high five. Even I think that was a creative punishment instead of a spank. Story 31. You do not have to actually spank your child if you express enough disappointment. I never struck my child severely, but I did call it a swat with barely any force behind it. I grew up with a father who used a belt, and I did not want to be that person. My son is a respectful college graduate with a strong work ethic, and I only swatted him maybe 4 times during his childhood. Story 32. Yes. Negative reinforcement needs to exist alongside positive reinforcement. You should be afraid of doing bad things. How many times have you seen a viral clip online where you said, "Yeah, that's a guy who's never been punched in the face." Do not punch your kids in the face, but if you get spanked for dropping a slur, it does not take a genius to put 2 and 2 together if they try that in public. Story 33. I am an old man who was raised before the era of treating children as friends instead of as individuals needing clear and concrete guidance in their early years. My parents were moderate in their discipline when we did something wrong that we had been told not to do. It ranged from slapping hands for a small child reaching for a stove burner or fireplace elements after being repeatedly warned not to because it would hurt them. The slapping of hands often made more of an impression of, "I better not do that again or I will get slapped again." That continued into our mid-teens, where punishments became more about not being allowed to do special things we wanted and often included extra chores so we stayed busy and did not complain about having nothing to do. Between early childhood and mid-teen years, we were given punishments designed to teach us the importance of following rules and limits that had been set. I received a few swats for really bad behavior that I never repeated because I remembered the consequences. Sometimes it meant staying home instead of going out to play, doing chores we would rather someone else did. Later, the worst punishment was often a parent's words expressing disappointment in us for what we did. That hurt more than any physical punishment I ever received. By then, spankings and such were endurable. But to know we messed up so badly that we were not trusted to handle semi-adult tasks that we had learned and finally been entrusted with, that, and hearing that we disappointed our parents was more painful. We would have preferred physical punishment or all the bad chores instead. It showed us where we fell short of being as adult as we wanted to be. Almost all of us heard those words in a disappointed voice, and it hurt our self-esteem. We were trained with small smacks and paddlings until we learned better. Then with tough chores on top of others. Finally, we towed the line because we hated to disappoint our parents. We were guided into adult personhood just as any animal is trained, with smacks, jabs, rubs, soft talks, and sad looks. What most parents forget is that children are human animals who need to be trained just as a wild cat teaches her kittens, with a bit of pain, a push or two, or a proud look of approval. All children are like animals with a blank slate. What they are encouraged or allowed to do sets guidelines for what they believe is right. If those guidelines are too broad, they will stray from the path and make mistakes repeatedly. They are like a dog never taught to go outside, who squats and messes on your carpet. Therefore, spankings are appropriate and should be used to influence a child to do the right thing. But you must be explicit about why and for what a child is being punished, or they will never learn anything except fear of you. Story 34. Great idea for discussion. I see a pretty even split. I am generally against it with a couple of possible exceptions. Maybe with a very small child who does not yet have the communication skills. A gentle slap could help build boundaries where words fail. At an older age, intentional repeated disobedience regarding something serious. I still do not think it is the best solution, but some children might react to it when everything else fails. Story 35. Honestly, my parents found other ways to punish me, so spankings were the easy way out. I wish I had gotten them instead. I remember my dad would make my brother and me get into a plank position or do a wall sit, and we were not allowed to move until he said so. My mom would make us stand in a corner with our arms straight up in the air. It doesn't sound bad until your shoulders start aching and gravity gets heavy. I got my fair share of spankings too, but I think my parents just realized that there are more effective ways of getting their point across. Story 36. Not as a first resort, but just like my mom had me do, I am going to have my kids pick the belt if it calls for it. Story 37. Spanking when children are young should never actually hurt, but should send a message that something is bad. Sometimes, between ages 5 and 7, it should be phased out entirely. There are many rules that need to be acknowledged before spanking is acceptable. 1. It should never be done in anger. 2. It should never cause harm. 3. It should only be used until better, more long-term punishments are reasonable. 4. It should not cause any fear or trauma. 5. It should only be a punishment that is immediate in response to very bad behavior. There is no reason for the child to worry about later consequences. Pain can be an effective teacher. When a young child picks up or handles something dangerous, a swift smack on the hand accompanied by a stern no is the best way to ensure the child does not repeat that behavior. You do not spank to hurt. You spank so there is an instant negative association with doing something bad or dangerous. You talk about it later. I have 3 children, and even the youngest has mostly outgrown spanking. We have an amazing relationship, and all of them understood when and why they were spanked, if they remember it at all. None have any negativity toward it. All ages 6, 10, and 13 acknowledge that it was necessary and that it honestly never hurt. They get hit with foam swords when we play fight far harder than they were ever spanked. Story 38. Spanking should not be the first response, and it is only a viable option within a certain age range. Spanking is acceptable as a few open-handed smacks on the buttocks. The appropriate age for spanking is generally between 3 or 4 years old to about 9 or 10 years old. Before this age, a child usually cannot understand why they are being spanked, even if it is explained. After this age, spanking may require excessive force to be effective, which can become abusive. A child must be old enough to understand why they are being spanked. For example, if they were told 5 times not to throw things at a sibling, grandparent, or anyone else, and then they are spanked for continuing to do so. I was spanked as a child, not often, but it did happen. The first time I remember being spanked was when my mother was getting me ready for a bath I did not want. As she turned to check the water, I ran out of the bathroom, down the hall, and out the front door wearing only a t-shirt. I got about 20 yards before my mother caught up and spanked me on the way back into the house. After that, I never tried to avoid a bath again. There have been other times in my life when I ran down the street naked or partially naked, but I was much older by then and it never involved my mother. Your experience may be different. Story 39. It should not be the primary option, but it should be the last option until a certain age. I do not have an exact figure for that age, but I would say if they are in school, they are probably too old for it. Story 40. The shame of spanking was far more devastating than the actual act of being hit. It only happened once or twice in my childhood, but I knew I had messed up. If it is a last resort and the parents make you understand the gravity of your actions and how harmful they were, and if spanking is the appropriate response, then I support it. Some parents rely on it or use it without any communication, which I believe is wrong. Story 41. I'm all for bringing it back. I think it is shocking that we have all let it get to the point where we are now. In my opinion, this is most likely the point of no return. In the end, that is what builds your moral foundation to know right from wrong, and what is and is not acceptable. Respect. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.